I'm just going to test my audio for.
Hey, Jan, so your mic is off, buddy.
Maybe the lo-fi music is messing up your microphone connection. Oh, I got the kickoff here. So that's great. Happy Lo-Fi 14, everybody. Thanks, Sean, for organizing. I'm Chris Anderson. You call me J Chris if you want. I've been doing this stuff for a long time. I'm going to start out with like a little history of lo-fi and I guess where it intersects with my interests. And so um, I'll try to go quickly on this, but this is like a 20-year time frame, and I've got CouchDB, which started in 2005 at the beginning, and today at the end, and the topics that I feel like intersect in this history of where we are now. For me, are CRDTs. That's obviously there's a lot of fans. Immutable data, which it may not be quite as clear what I think immutable data is a requirement for delivering on the promise of local first, and then hash addressing, which is immutability done right. It gives you, all these superpowers that we're still learning about in the research community. So let's see. Back in the day, we had this server that had syncable data that gave people this inspiration on the idea that you could have local first. And we even built these HTML apps that lived inside the server that synced with the data and had that same ethos. And people even used it for like rural healthcare, and they're still using it for ticketing on United Airlines and pilot scheduling and stuff like that. So this is real stuff and it works. And that innovation train kind of like, okay, so my first vision of Fireproof started in like probably in 2012-13, which is right around, if you remember, when React first started. But I wanted to be able to do what we could do with the Couch ecosystem, but just in JavaScript, just in the browser. And it took another 10 years before the platform was ready. But even back then, I had this vision for the brand. And if anybody else wants to do a database, they could call it BLAT, bacon, lettuce, avocado, and tomato. You don't need servers when you blat your data. With this JavaScript code in your browser, your users get rowdy, your app gets louder, right? So we knew we could build a full app just in the browser using all this power eventually, but it took the rise of hash addressing and the resurgence of CRDTs with Ink and Switch work and its popularity in 2019 and 20 to make it so that the platform is ready now. And so I'll talk about Prolly trees and Merkle CRDTs at the end, which if like what we were doing with Couch was early for CRDTs, I kind of feel like Prolly trees are early too. And I bet a bunch of the folks in this audience are familiar with them, but a bunch aren't. And they're a form of CRDT. So we'll get into that toward the end of the presentation. But this is kind of my little history of how these threads run together. And I think maybe we forget that in the how we got to our view today of CRDTs and immutable data has this through line that goes back to Clojure script interacting with React and David Nolan's OHM library that inspired so much of this downstream stuff. So I don't know. I think it's fun to remember that the state management problem space is really where a lot of these solutions first began. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is the dynamic between local first, zero setup, and data anywhere. So to me, local first means offline data. It means your data works, even when you're disconnected. And to do that right, you need
Hello.
a form of CRDT. If you go down that path, like pretty soon you're going to be like, hey, why am I logging into a centralized service? So you're going to want to have some kind of self-sovereign auth. And eventually that turns into peer-to-peer. And so having, I guess, been inspired into this world by peer-to-peer back in like 2008, 2009 timeframe, maybe now my view is that like there's a certain like mathematical and software structures that are required to do this right. And if you get them, they get a lot more benefits than peer-to-peer. To me, it's worth it so much that like if I don't get to the peer-to-peer part, like it still is worth doing all the stuff, and it makes peer-to-peer just a super easy add-on to the way that the mathematics of the rest come together. So local first enables zero setup, and I feel like this is the developer experience unfair advantage that our community can have that can really open up like the mainstream mass of web developers to feel included in the way we do things. And that's because when you have self-sufficient systems that can run just in JavaScript, like just in a Lambda function or just in the browser, if you package them for anybody to use, for people who just got out of code school or whatever, you could just drop a script tag in. And in the same way, you know, if we think about like 2006, 2007, everybody dropping jQuery into WordPress sites, I feel like that is the lo-fi I want to see. I want to see Fireproof dropped into legacy government forms to handle the LLM integration, because you wouldn't want to put that into the legacy database. And so running anywhere, well, we'll get to that, but the point of zero setup is that you're just writing like an app in your browser, in your local developer environment, and it just works. And you know, here's like an app that we have that is, you know, just the traditional OpenAI chat back and forth. The data for this all integrates in a PartyKit instance. So the, you know, let's see if it knows anything about local first. And so the this data all happens like back between PartyKit and the LLM, sorted Fireproof locally on PartyKit, and then the sync automatically streams back out to the browser so that you have like a single data model that shows up in multiple places. So I guess we have a new local first mascot. I like the glasses. Kind of reminds me of Walter from Big Lebowski. So yeah, and then with zero setup, you know, the next thing developers want is live collaboration. So if you have like a chat style app or a Slack style app, you have everyone in your team able to, you know, work together with each other and, you know, tag the items in their applications. And so that's zero setup. I feel like that's a huge advantage, because if you go look at other database and backend technologies, like you wanted to store whether or not the user wanted, you know, the delivery today or tomorrow, but instead you got like an entire Amazon account with an RDS and, you know, like a network zone and an API gateway and a Lambda, and, you know, I mean, there's just no end. So this is a huge competitive advantage that we have in the current ecosystem. But if you have zero setup, you have to back it up with a data anywhere promise. And that's because if I go as a front end dev and go put, you know, put some app together using these tools, and then I show it to my backend team and they say, what? Right? Then that still didn't work. I need to get to a backend team, yes. And the way you do that is by working in any environment. And the way you work in any environment is by being able to consume commodity services for your backend. So I saw another lo-fi talk saying local first should use blob stores and KV, and that's all we require from our backend services is a KV register and a blob store. So runs great on S3 or whatever you can put it, you know, whatever you've already got. And I think a lot of local first can do this. It's just a matter of building connectors so that when your users do the zero setup thing, then they can, you know, win from the data anywhere promise. And when you get that right, I talked about this a little bit, but we all love writing these greenfield apps. Like, a cool photo gallery or whatever. But the next decade, I think, is going to be about turning brownfield apps into greenfield apps by integrating LLM calls and putting new widgets on top without having like if you're going to go AI Copilot enable the call center app that is 5 years old, running on some Flask ASP.NET whatever kind of nightmare backend with existing auth zero and a bunch of business rules about who could do what and such. You're not going to rewrite the app. That's just crazy. You're going to write an AI agent that uses the app. And so there's just going to be a lot of that. And embedding local first databases into existing sessions is the right way to do it. Now's the part where I get to talk about Merkle integrity, or I think maybe that'll come in a minute. Let's see. Yeah, I think I'll do the demo first. But Merkle integrity is like a big part of the data structures that give us data anywhere. I'm going to talk through this demo before I give it because, like most demos, it's just a to-do list. And if I check the box on the other side, they both change, right? So that's obviously not what's cool about it. What's cool about it is different apps with the same data. And that's not even cool because it's like technically how did you do that or whatever. It's cool because of what it enables. And we found this with Couchbase Mobile. As soon as you have, like, you could painstakingly put together this iOS app, and like really like stress about every little, how this forward key's hooked up to that or whatever. And then when you go and you already have the data worked out, like slapping an Android UI on that gets easy. And once you have two UIs, now you want to do like the .NET UI or a web UI or some kind of process integrating on the back end via the C build that they offer. So the idea of being able to take your same data and put it on different platforms and different apps is just so powerful, not in terms only of that you already have the data, now you can use it, but it makes the UI portion and the interactive portion of your app just like way lower risk feeling to deal with. It's like, oh yeah, that's just like how it looks on this one. Same data over here. You want to change it, you do or you don't. I think it makes apps kind of a joy to work with to have that data portability. So in one of the demos, and this is kind of like my goal here is to show some heterogeneity. So I've got a code pen running just a vanilla JS app with the inline function execution builds. So those are for people who don't know how bundlers work. If your software doesn't work for people who are scared of bundlers, then you should just do that for them. It's a lot of work, but don't make them do it. And so if I go over to, here's the app running, and I could check off all the boxes. And now if I come over to the other one, we'll see. This is a jQuery app, but it's the first time I've ever used import on jQuery. So that was like a fun moment for me. And so here it is. Let's see. Yeah, it looks like we're running. I might have to refresh this one. But yeah, so now we can get that local first magic. Yay. Demo at LoFi. Boom. So same data set, two different apps, super liberating as a developer to not have to stress about that stuff. And the one you just saw uses PartyKit on the back end and S3 for storing the blobs. You could store it in Netlify or DynamoDB or all kinds of options. I guess one thing I didn't show that we're in the middle of building is the same way those two apps were able to be live on the same data set. As a Fireproof cloud user, you also get same data set with your Fireproof dashboard. And so all these apps that you're building on minute zero, your live data is also available in the dashboard in the cloud. There's more to say about this. I think for folks here who are building stuff, if you are interested in self-sovereign authentication, definitely go to ucan.xyz and read up about that. It's like if JWTs were signed by the non-extractable key pair in the client browser, and it brings it's just kind of like it's the promise that we've been looking for with self-sovereign auth and well standardized and stuff. So we don't have it baked in. We just like it. We let you use anything, but in the future we may add some layers that are UCAN native. Okay, so a Merkle tree, it's just like a blockchain where subsequent blocks have their content addressed hash based on the content of the other blocks they reference. And that makes the data structure authenticating, right? It's self-verifying. If I have this hash, any other corruption anywhere in the tree will make it make the proof fail, and then you you have detectable data corruption, and it makes the whole thing tamper-proof. It's also really neat because if you're using content addressing all the way down the tree, then each one of these blocks is immutable, and the cache stuff is just super easy, right? Like it's not going to change. So it takes a lot of the operational difficulties out of managing a database and managing a storage engine, which is super important if you're going to have people deploying it anywhere and you don't know what the backend is going to be. So actually, that's why I had these guys here. It's because Fireproof will just run on anything. It loves to chew up your old storage and make it into useful API. So if a Merkle tree is these hashed, hashes of blocks all the way up, then a Prolly tree is one that has the characteristic that no matter what order you insert the values, you get the same tree chunking. And that means that the same data set, no matter who processed it, is going to have the same root identifier. And it also means that as you segment the key space going down, those sub-identifiers for the storage blocks are going to be the same. And that means that a peer can just like ask another peer for the blocks that are associated with some subtree and sync subtrees efficiently. There's maybe more than I have time to say about this, but all Merkle diffs are CRDTs, and that's just to say that if you have any data structure that is content addressed and hash, that's append only, immutable hash addressed, that it's got a commutative operation for merging it. But the CRDT that we use is an event-based one. So when we have a merge that we're doing across CRDT clients, we use a causal ordering to decide what the final state of the data set is. And I'll talk more about that another time because I think I'm getting to the end of my clock here. But thanks so much, and it's really an honor to be here. Thanks, Jans, for organizing this, and thanks, Adam, and everybody in this community for like making local first into a thing that's a thing, because I've been waiting for like a decade for this to happen, and I just can't imagine a world without this kind of technology. So let's keep it up.
Hey, y'all. I'm going to be Jans for a second. He tapped me to stand in for him since his audio
minutes, I want to talk to you about super apps, if you haven't heard of them, and kind of explain why we're building a super app. If you've never been to China or never used WeChat, you'll be surprised how much better your life can be if all the apps were more integrated. WeChat is something you would go to when you're in China for pretty much all the services you're used to grabbing from other apps out here in the States, like looking up a service provider, getting a car share, all kinds of things are all integrated into one big app. And to like illustrate the power of that, I'm going to draw on a really nice hypothetical that was put together by the New York Times, which I will paraphrase for you now. So imagine you have a dog that needs a shower. It's going to go a little bit left field. You open the app and you locate a service provider. You find a local provider and order and pay for a service. Within an hour, a man with a big vacuum shows up to shampoo and clean your dog. Shortly after, your dog is clean and happy. This makes you happy, and you take a picture of your corgi and share with your friends. You tag the service provider and you earn loyalty points. And you've been doing all of this while still inside WeChat. Meanwhile, a friend of yours who likes Hello Kitty is currently busy slacking off at her boring office job nearby. And she sees your freshly groomed corgi and likes your post. And she decides that her poodle is also overdue for a similar service. She instantly orders and pays for the same vendor, all without leaving WeChat. Within minutes, another man with a vacuum is on his way to her place to groom her dog. And meanwhile, while chatting with you about your dog, she's reminded of a great noodle place not far away. And she's like, you have to come, but it's a bit of a trip. You agree to go. So you grab a taxi to the destination she suggested, also with one tap, also without leaving WeChat. Meanwhile, she orders the food and pays for the food in advance while still at her office. And also, she's never left the app. After your taxi ride, your taxi driver will use the proceeds from your fare to invest in some risky investment asset that was advertised to him by some other company, also without moving the money out of WeChat or without leaving WeChat itself. You arrive at the restaurant. The restaurant already knows you're near. As soon as you walk in, your name appears on the board, your WeChat profile picture shows up, and your order gets sent to the kitchen automatically. Within minutes, without talking to anybody, your food is ready and it's on its way to your table. You enjoy your food, but you found the pork belly to be salty, so you get back into the app and you leave a scathing review. And while leaving that review, you recall that you still haven't paid your friend for the food, and so you do that transfer instantly, also without leaving the app. This entire time, neither you nor your friend nor the restaurant have ever left the app. By combining the service provider's point of sale with a mobile wallet and a social network, WeChat alters the definition of virality. It's really interesting because it's not just content and ideas that can go viral anymore. It's now your corgi, your noodles, your service providers, and physical goods that can go viral as well. Ogilvy estimates that 40% of companies' sales in China all happen through WeChat. Tech executives think about WeChat as like a utility, more like water or electricity. And it's not alone. There are tons of other super apps like WeChat that have sprung up in each in their respective regions. WeChat in China has become the most popular app by a wide margin. If you look at penetration, it's nearly 100% of all devices run WeChat. This number is about kind of all of China, including all of the rural areas. If you go to a city, you pretty much can't live without it. And at the heart of WeChat's success is this thing they call the mini program, the mini program that they run. They're like apps, but they're like in the sense that they're interactive experiences, but they're much smaller, much lighter, and they're hosted entirely within WeChat. Remember that pet cleaning service provider? The services menu that we were looking at, that was a mini app that the pet cleaning service built. The food order in advance of the restaurant was also done through the restaurant's mini app. The restaurant's TVs are also connected to WeChat and are also running essentially a mini app. Mini apps or mini programs are based on HTML and web tech, but they're custom tailored. The runtime is very specific, and it basically creates this custom WeChat platform with custom APIs. It makes these apps more secure and more performant and more consistent. The best things about them are that actually, even it's a cultural thing that mini apps are discardable. That's a very unique thing to this ecosystem. Is that for the most part you're interacting locally at some place of business, like a restaurant or a piece of transit, and you're scanning a QR code, you're getting the app, you're interacting with it, and then it's not installed or it doesn't take your data. It kind of just vanishes the moment you kind of move on to your next thing. In 2021, WeChat mini programs processed more than $400 billion in transaction volume. And that was a growth of 70% year over year, just enormous growth. And all of this transformation with WeChat in China kind of unfolded over some time in the last decade. In 2014 was when they first launched WeChat payments, which really changed the growth rate. And it all started with this, the red envelope. If folks aren't familiar with the red envelope, it's a very cultural thing. It's a very long-standing tradition. It's a monetary gift that people give to each other on holidays. It can happen between family, relatives, friends, or colleagues during holidays or special occasions. And the lunar calendar year, the Lunar New Year is like probably the biggest event where a lot of these red envelopes get exchanged. And what WeChat did was very clever. They launched their payments platform and their ability to send these red envelopes on the platform right before the Lunar New Year in 2014. And that caused the number of people using WeChat payments to triple from 30 to 100 million in just 1 month. In 2015 was the first time that China's mobile transaction volume surpassed all of the US for the first time. China's mobile payments market was estimated to be 30 times larger than the forecast for the US in 2017, and it was going to be doubling the following year. The question, what has the US been doing about this? Why don't we have WeChat or super apps? Mark pitched us a novel vision in 2016. This is a few years after. He said things like, you don't have to go installing apps anymore. You can just chat with your merchants, interact with their services, and send them payments all inside Messenger. Of course, these are features that WeChat users have been used to for a few years by that point. It wasn't too novel, but it was novel to the US audience. It didn't last too long. About 2 years later, there was a Messenger executive who kind of admitted that Messenger became way too cluttered, and the new focus was back to streamlining and simplifying Messenger. So they kind of backed out of the super app vision. Snapchat had a similar bout. They had a false start in the mobile payments game. They didn't scale as fast as Venmo and Zelle, and they kind of cashed out of it in 2018, 4 years after partnering with Square to implement mobile payments inside Snapchat. So, reasons why it maybe hasn't taken off. Maybe users don't like to put all their stuff in the same app. Maybe, people don't trust Facebook for things, maybe people just don't like cluttered apps, right? There's maybe a cultural thing. But what about WeChat itself? How come we don't have WeChat in the States? Well, this was an executive order signed by President Trump in 2020, which effectively just banned outright WeChat transactions to kind of, stymie the threat. And in response to this, Chinese media started to poll their citizens for a potential iPhone ban. They wanted to kind of demonstrate that iPhones are not the biggest thing. And what was really interesting is almost everybody in the poll responded that they would prefer to keep WeChat over their iPhone if they were forced to have a choice. It's really interesting. It's just the citation was that it's just too essential. It runs daily life. And slowly but surely, we see in the West here that other apps are kind of moving in that same direction. Everybody's recognizing the super app trend. Uber, has since added a whole pile of services that are not just rideshare. Netflix in 2021 launched an in-app games collection. Now you can install and run basically web games inside Netflix clients. In 2022, Elon bought Twitter, renamed it to X, and his whole thing is in large part to just go after essentially what WeChat did. In a different interview, he mentioned that he thinks a super app like WeChat can handle up to half of the world's commerce, making this like the biggest bet that Elon's working on overall. Meanwhile, just a few weeks ago, there was a fresh antitrust lawsuit you guys might have seen go by. The United States of America is suing Apple and claiming monopolistic behavior. And what's really curious is, excuse me, the whole argument is organized around how Apple is trying to prevent super apps. Basically, they're saying that Apple's been doing anti-competitive things with their contracts, their fees, and API services, and that those have been contributing to precluding specifically super apps, as well as 4 other categories of apps, but they might as well be kind of mini apps inside the super app paradigm. And despite not mentioning WeChat by name, the lawsuit like directly references the WeChat mini app model, and all of the terms are coming straight from the WeChat ecosystem. For example, like mini program, that came straight from WeChat, or the fact that they have to be based on HTML5 or JavaScript, that's all purely lifted from China. There was an interesting quote. One Apple manager put it. He said, allowing super apps to become the main gateway where people play games, book cars, and make payments would let the barbarians in at the gate. You know, when a super app offers popular mini programs, iOS stickiness goes down. And so that's why Apple's been very careful. The lawyers build their entire argument on, or in part, on the fact that mini apps are easier to use than the full App Store. And this is supported by end user response and user data from WeChat. They love the convenience of not having to sign in to 7 different services to be able to pay instantly. The citation here, they lack navigation, setting up accounts, and all of the passwords you have to set up for multiple apps. Much easier with WeChat. So in summary, it seems like there's a number of reasons why super apps haven't taken off in the US. You know, there's some gatekeeping going on, regulation, there's user preference and data privacy. But it's clear to many people, you know, that super apps are a big trend, and we're going to see a lot of it in the future. There's an article by Scott Galloway, a professor of marketing at New York University, where he talks about super apps as the next huge opportunity. So why are we building a super app? Well, we're about developers. We love developers. That's why we build a developer platform called DxOS, where we're all about data privacy. But we don't think it's enough, right? So Apple keeps your content private, but they still control your access to it, and they can delete it from their servers anytime. So the big thing, as Chris mentioned just now, was, you know, data sovereignty is another huge piece of this. Our ability to control and you know, control the access to our data is very important. But that's not enough either. You can control access to your data, but if it's stored in like a non-portable or some kind of opaque format, it can't really be used outside the original app. So we also really care about credible exit, that you're able to take your content outside the app and actually use it elsewhere. At the core of our platform is Echo, the Echo database. It's an acronym, stands for eventually consistent hierarchical object store. It's based on CRDTs. It works with no central authority, synchronizes over peer-to-peer, over WebRTC. Data can't be destroyed by the application. The end user always retains the ability to extract their data. And what's really great about this is it simplifies the 3-tier model, as we all know, down to just 1 tier. It's really convenient. There's no APIs, no ORMs. You're just dealing with the database on the client. We're proud of the API. It's really easy to use Echo. You can just put any old JavaScript object in there. And if you wanted to modify your objects, this is a bit counter to how it feels maybe to you. You know, the immutable folks are probably throwing up in arms. But you can just modify the objects directly, and under the hood will take care of propagating that change to connected peers. There's a number of tech that supports Echo. Halo is a decentralized identity system. We're now in a working group with Ink and Switch and Local First Auth, and we're putting together UCAN and a number of the stuff that's happening in Ink and Switch and Local First and Halo, and we're going to make something cool for the community. Let's see. Mesh is our peer-to-peer networking layer, and Cube is our hosting appliance that you can use for self-sovereign hosting. But you can't build a hammer without nails. All of these frameworks on the screen have all been byproducts of building something large and real and for production, like Facebook itself or Shopify. So we know that we needed a production application to validate that DxOS works great. And So this is Composer, the application we're working on. It's a free, open source, developer extensible collaboration tool. And we're a team of 10 globally distributed engineers, and we use Composer every day to collaborate in meetings, sync and async as we work on DXOS. It's free, it's open source, it's mobile friendly, and it's accessible. We lose productivity in the boundaries between our apps, is what we find. Outside the IDE, we use a number of apps to get our planning and design work done. And good luck trying to find the paper trail behind some specific piece of code. It's spread between disparate Discord threads, Notion docs, and GitHub issues. And we think that an extensible super app is the right answer because it can enable closing all of those gaps between the disparate tools by bringing together all of the data into one spot where you can accomplish everything on the same canvas using intuitive gestures like drag and drop. Thank you, Jans. Yes, that's a perfect shirt to wear. Because you lose a lot of stuff in the context switching between, if you wanted to draw a diagram, all of a sudden you have to go find a diagramming app, go find the right context. We think it should all be in one place. Remember how much easier it was to one tap order a taxi to the restaurant your friend messaged you about because you were all in the same app? Well, we think that's what will happen when we merge multiple apps into one. For example, we previously didn't do much diagramming when we did design discussions together because there was enough overhead to just having to find the app and find the context and so on. But in Composer, we put together CodeMirror as our document editor. It's really great because it has syntax highlighting and Vim mode and all of the stuff that developers care about, and TL draw. And so now we have in our same context when we're having a collaborative session, you can make code together, make diagrams together, and we found that made it so much easier to communicate. We now really enjoy being able to just doodle and collaborate inside Composer when we work together. And the lack of context switching really just creates the space that we otherwise wouldn't be doing this. We've established an extensibility model. So everything on the screen is completely changeable. It's every part of the UI is implemented by some plugin. So you're welcome to change that or improve that. We've built a handful of primitives for sharing, as well as the first few plugins for documents and diagrams, whiteboarding, and so on. And to explore, we've also built a whole ton of experimental plugins. We've played with integrating local LLM models into this environment, integrating GitHub, email, inline code notebooks, kind of like Jupyter notebooks, drag and drop Kanban boards, and we have many others. And that's all in a list of plugins you can play with in the settings panel when you get there. You can find all this stuff on dxos.org. Check them out. Come hang out with us on Discord. I'll post an invite link to the chat here, and let us know what you think. Thank you very much.
Awesome presentation, Zhenya. If you don't mind, stop sharing. I am a big fan of DXOS, and if you don't believe my shirt, I also use Composer, and it's an awesome experience. You can turn like H1 headlines into presentations, so like you write a doc and then move into a situation where you're just like literally presenting with that doc. Running a little behind, quick intro to Adam, OG founder, and one of the people that is responsible for having us here in this local first ecosystem by launching Ink and Switch, and also co-founder of Heroku. At the end, we'll try to get him to share some of his journey with us. Over to you, Adam.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'll have a short one here since I know we're getting towards the top of the hour, but I think it's an important question for this community, and actually I think in some ways follows on nicely maybe from the super apps topic. So let me do the screen share here. Yeah, so I want to talk about the economics of Local First. And yeah, quickly just introducing myself, among other things, I was one of the co-founders of Ink and Switch. I was one of the co-authors of the Local First essay from 2019. Of course, there was much work that led into what we now call that. Before that, Chris's timeline illustrated that pretty well, but yeah, I think that was our... Yeah. Sure. I don't see where it offers me the option of frame rate. Oh, yeah, it says 723, 30 FPS. Yeah.
Let me jump on the zoomer and you can share it with me there. Had to happen at the worst time too.
No worries. Sounds like folks in chats can see it. So, should I proceed?
Can you send me the link for the Zoom? It's not sharing on my end. We'll switch over to Zoom. I'll share your screen there and I'll stream.
Sure, I can do that. Let's see here.
In the brief intermission, I will say that like the super app model is quite interesting. I'm personally a fan of a connected garden over a super app, and the primitives being able to be like viewable and editable with like any other software you use is one of the more exciting things that I find with DxOS. Sort of like auto merge being able to edit the data substrate and see the UI react to that.
I posted a Zoom link. Do we want to use that instead, or?
Yeah, if you stop sharing here and share your screen to the Zoom, I'll be able to share here.
All right. Sorry, I didn't quite get. Is the idea to move completely to Zoom or just use that for the screen share?
Just the screen share.
Got it. Okay.
Almost there. All right. You're on.
Right. So we're one layer of indirection here. Cool. All right. Then I will proceed. Yeah. So the topic here is economics of local first. Yeah, I introduced myself there. So I think this follows on nicely from the super apps discussion. So this is short and it's mostly questions and not answers. And so I thought this would be good for this community because it creates a pretty natural follow-up for either Q&A time or just discussion in the chat afterwards. I borrowed this phrase from my colleague Peter Van Hardenberg, which is, I think it's time for us to say local first is open for business. That essay that we wrote that coined the term is 5 years old. It was full of lofty principles and ideals and about data ownership and so forth that I still 100% believe in. But we're asking people to make a seismic shift in how they store data. And for that to be successful, there has to be an economic model or multiple economic models. And I think you have to acknowledge that cloud and web and B2B SaaS was just an unbelievable economic engine in the sense that it was this fit between the way people wanted to purchase and consume their software, willingness to pay, again, mainly from the business side, and your ability to kind of build and deploy that and iterate on that rapidly. And you had this virtuous cycle. Success stories, too numerous to count at this point, venture-backed, indie businesses that grew up big, et cetera. That it produces more funding for the next generation and inspires entrepreneurs and so on. And so starting that virtuous cycle for local first, I feel like now is the time. I feel like the technology is there. The design kind of concepts we're still iterating on, but I think it's far enough along. So now the question is kind of this economic model. There are some success stories, not as so many, but and actually others should share if you have other ideas. I put the messaging apps in here because I feel like to some extent they sort of skipped over the cloud era because you had SMS stuff that delivered to your phone, which you obviously was just stored on your phone, and then the new generation of kind of especially encrypted apps like Signal and WhatsApp, essentially combined with the mobile stuff. You know, the telecom is just an intermediary. And then you have a bunch of others that I would count. Obsidian, I think, kind of an indie darling. The whole point of their kind of note-taking product pitch is you own your data. Some smaller, but still also very successful ones, talking, you know, hundreds of thousands or millions of users in some cases, is Reflect Notes or Anytype. Linear as a startup, which is not really as far along on local first in the sense of that they came to it from data ownership, but they came to those ideals through a different way, which is kind of UI performance. And indeed, I think this is they're speaking at the Local First conference we're doing in Berlin here end of next month. So yeah, they'll speak about that. And one from just last week, the browser company, you know, they have this browser called Arc that's quite successful at this point. They launched their sync. They built out local first. It makes perfect sense, right? You don't want your browsing bookmarks and history and things like that to be in some server where you get a spinner when you go to access them. So certainly open to hearing about other success stories. It's still so early. It's hard to, there aren't a lot, but I think we need to point to those and point to and look at the ways that local first may have either enabled their business model, enabled them to stand out as a product, and, you know, combine that with, you know, how they make money as a business. Of course, you got dev tools and infrastructure. So YJS, AutoMerge, which is created by the Ink and Switch Lab, you know, those are classic open source models, and I think are doing pretty well on that basis. Ditto, I think, is a pretty solid commercial success. They've got major clients with airlines that have like sort of need for this kind of offline mesh network stuff, and then a bunch of other stuff, including some of the folks we heard from earlier, and I think in LoFi in general. You know, I think a lot of folks are building the dev infrastructure, whether it's an open source model, whether it's more of a, you know, more of a classic SaaS kind of dev tools service. And to some extent, you might say, okay, are these they're less success stories in terms of kind of size, in terms of number of customers or whatever, and more just that they're getting investment dollars. And, you know, that's not the same as heavy long-term real world usage, but it, you know, venture capitalists, for all you can say about them, they, you know, they're professional investors. Their job is to identify business opportunities. They put money, in some cases, a lot of money into these companies because they think that, you know, there's some business model there. So what actually is the business model? And I think the answer is we don't know yet. There's probably room for like a native local first business model. But I also think we should come from this place of like, it's already such a big paradigm shift. And in terms of how we build apps, what we're asking in terms of shifting a lot of data ownership from the company to the end user, how the collaboration model works. So adding business model innovation on top of that, kind of a big bite. So I think there's something to be said for keeping it simple, if that's the word for it, but at the same time also being open to, you know, a new model for data storage, persistence, collaboration also potentially opens up the possibility of you know, new business models, which is also quite exciting. Kind of already touched on this, but the kind of it's just SaaS is a good way to go. The nice thing about that is you don't need to explain anything to end users. They pay a subscription. Obsidian does a version of this for their sync. Reflect Notes does it. Others do. In some cases, there is still an authoritative server in the middle, and I think Chris touched on this. You know, self-sovereign identity to me is a part of the grander local first vision. But from my long experience working on this, everything to do with peer-to-peer and self-hosting and federation is still really research. I don't think it's production-ready software. That's my personal experience. But I think you can get a lot of the benefits of, you know, again, shifting so much more of the data ownership to end users with a thing that looks kind of SaaS-y, so to speak. But then, you know, that actually makes the business model less powerful. The data mode is not as powerful. It's easier for people, you know, migration is easy to do. You own your data more and that sort of thing. And there's other benefits that these, you know, suck up all your data businesses, you know, Google being the classic, get by aggregating user data. And part of what we're saying is we want to take some of those benefits back from the business and retain them for the end user and for the customer. That's good, but we also have to acknowledge that we're taking away benefits from the business that does impact their ability to make a solid business model. So we need to fill that in some other way. Other things I think I mentioned there, YJS and AutoMerge, I think are both really classic open source models. Corporate sponsorship, client work, that sort of thing. Again, this isn't huge scale, but Things don't have to be huge scale necessarily to be a success. They need a financial engine that works. And I think both YJS and AutoMerge at this point have that. Have infrastructure. I think there's nothing special we need to do there. It's probably the same model as Amazon Web Services, Firebase, et cetera. As mentioned earlier, apparently venture backable by seeing the money going into these companies. And I think one we could bring back, this is less of an innovation and more a blast from the past, is software licensing. Obsidian does a version of this. A lot of indie businesses like Sublime Text, which is an editor I really like using. It is just classic. You pay for the software and then you have it. Now, I think that probably works best for kind of more bootstrapped style businesses, but also for me, part of the vision for Local First always has been a proliferation of more ways to create software, personal apps, small businesses, big businesses as well, and that indeed perhaps simple licensing of the style of these actually could be a good way to go. I'll end on the note that this could be a kind of transition. I think I can already tell from some of the notes I'm noting in the chat here that people are feeling this. It can be a kind of discomfort to go from a research, grand ideas, ivory tower, realm of philosophy into this kind of crass world of like, how does the money work? And indeed can even maybe in some cases that kind of transition. I've seen communities go through that transition, including open source, decades ago, and that can be a challenge. I would encourage us to avoid purity calls and no true Scotsman. At some point you do have to draw the line and say, at this point, you can't call something local first if it doesn't actually, to some extent, overlap with those principles. One question might be, my last business, a company called Muse, we built a local first sync server based on the research we did at IncodeSwitch. We did have an authoritative server that was in the middle, and we designed it for encryption, but hadn't gotten around to building it. Were we right to be able to call that local first? And I think yes, because we were focused on data ownership and the ability for you to keep using it. If the company went out of business or something changed, and ultimately that the company doesn't have control over the data, you do. But I think that's a judgment call for each individual business, and you got to think about how it fits with your business model. And for me, ultimately, it's a win if the parts of local first that are production ready and fit with a given company's business model or financial engine that makes it into software that people are using in the real world, especially at scale. That's what I want to see. And in the meantime, there's a huge role for the academic community and the wider community of people that believe in these ideals to continue to take the parts that maybe aren't quite ready for real world usage yet or don't mesh well with the financial engine and figure out how we can push that further. That's the end.
Awesome, Adam. And you show your entrepreneurial grit with the conclusions, because I think a lot of conversations boil down to sometimes saying like the pros and cons of an idea as opposed to what's practical and what you can pull off. And in this community, as you all probably have sensed, my priority is pragmatic concerns of reinventing the internet. And I kind of like the lo-fi name part of because it has a little bit of distance from the full local first, and that's kind of an idea that I am toying with. But it seems like there's a lot of music fans here. We'll keep giving that some consideration and get back to you guys. For the remainder of the call, Adam, I don't know how much time you have, but would love to hear the quick story on your origin story of Local First, the Ink and Switch Lab, maybe even the Heroku process.
Yeah, I do have to run in a minute, so that would be a long story to tell right now. Maybe I will just tell the Ink and Switch story, just because that's probably most relevant to this group. Yeah, really briefly, this was after I had ended my time at Heroku, which was a success in quite a lot of ways, and also kind of certain irony here, obviously, because it was a piece of this kind of cloud revolution and people writing software in a more cloudy sort of way. But in many cases, the places I came to around Local First were in some cases reactions to running a business that was this infrastructure that was in the critical path. thinking, it'd be nice if every time someone clicked a button, it didn't need to route through servers in West Virginia. And that me, as a person responsible for running those servers, that actually I didn't like that job. I wanted to write the software and products and great user experience, and the operational side of it. It felt like something was lost in going to a complete thin client model. But yeah, Ink and Switch came about because me and the other two Heroku co-founders, we sat down to say, all right, we have some freedom and some opportunity to think about, think big picture and think long term. And we thought about things we were concerned about in computing, like your phone turning into a Skinner box that steals your attention. How we would put it today. I think back then we didn't have that terminology for it. The availability of programming becoming in some ways less and less. The ability to make your own apps, the ability to control your own data. These were all things that we kind of felt, but we said, look, we don't really have a good concrete idea for a company to start. We looked at the history of kind of look at the academic world and what that looks like, but we ended up looking in particular the corporate R&D lab. The big classics obviously are Xerox PARC. Everyone references a lot, but there's also Bell Labs is one of the most just epic sources of industrial invention historically, and many smaller examples as well of basically labs who have a kind of academic but kind of applied tradition that are attached to corporations. And we had the idea of like, could we start a corporate R&D lab but leave out the corporation and instead get kind of like small amounts of grant money from the kind of Silicon Valley world? If we made the amount of money small enough and we sort of hinted at a grand future enough, could we make that happen? And yeah, that was the start. But it was many years of working on that kind of behind closed doors before we published our first real essay. And indeed, it took a while to find our voice and that sort of thing, and even explain what we were doing. But the vision was a new way to think about computing, and in particular, computing for people who are doing productive and creative things with computers. Shopping and chat and social media. These things are all just fine, but I consider them consumption tasks. That's where all of the energy and horsepower and attention and whatever, especially 5-10 years ago. This has changed a little bit more recently, but that was where all of the Silicon Valley and general tech world kind of attention was. That's the cool software to make. I want to make Facebook. I don't want to make some boring spreadsheet. But from my point of view, boring spreadsheets is where most of the value of computers is. And so that was what Ink and Switch wanted to help push forward, and I hope we've managed to do that in some way.
Well, we hope to do you guys proud too. And thank you for hopping on. I know you have to run. There's an awesome Muse retrospective link. I'll drop it if it hasn't been shared already. It's basically a masterclass for entrepreneurship. Respect Adam quite a bit. He has a very multidimensional view on businesses. So thank you for your time. And in continuing with the founder edition, we have another founder of Couchbase. Go ahead.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Hey, yeah, I told a little bit of the history earlier, but I think if I was going to say the part of it that didn't really make the technical story, it's really about the community. And, a bunch of people, I think, got into Couch. It was good times, right? Good timing, because people got into it because they loved JSON, and there really was no other way to do JSON. And it turns out that people who love JSON were the cool people to hang out with. So it was really, kind of similar. There's some parallels to today. Right. And so I think a lot of that came from, it's a similar ethos of really wanting to empower developers and like, um, I don't know, show up with, here's the thing we can all do. Go pick a local first database or stack or something, write a party kit app, and write it for your friend who's learning to code. And don't make it the best app, make it the easiest to read the code app that gets the job done. And then send it to your friend and say, hey, check it out. Look how easy it is to build a fireproof app with Netlify or whatever. That's how we grow this community, because as much as it's cool for the experts to like what we're doing, I remember something from back in the day. I remember how the experts felt about MongoDB. I don't need to repeat that here, but it turns out it doesn't matter how the experts feel.
That's a great point. What would you
So
say?
make it real easy for the beginners. Oh, go ahead.
I mean, yeah, like I saw a the 2023 C++ address, and sort of the defense against Rust is that C++ can write equally secure code, and that it would take $10 billion to kind of migrate your code, and that was just like the bell tolling in my head, because the npm experience of like packages, communities, and support, and everybody's outwardly sharing their progress was one of the more exciting things about the front end kind of world, and there's none of that in C++. You can't even get your package to compile. This is not a Rust promotional video, but just to say people working together is 100x leverage than compared to everybody figuring out their own thing. And you can't really scale experts, so the easier something is, the more approachable it is, the more it can be done with it. I'm curious to hear sort of like your early days in when you were deciding to found CouchDB, or how you and your co-founder got
Okay.
together. Some of that, like,
Well, Damian Katz deserves all the credit for the math on this, and Jan Leonard, I think maybe in the call here, he deserves all the credit for the community. I think I deserve the credit for the activation energy of let's make a company out of this. I think I think what I learned is true, and what I was hoping to learn is that when you get, and this is kind of to Adam's points earlier, when you get the commercial, when you get the juice of commerce flowing through your software, it's a whole different ballgame. It just is, and when, for instance, Couchbase Mobile started getting used by United Airlines and NTT Docomo and like Disney World. That was at that point, like I was like, my work here is done. I mean, at a certain point, right? Like at that point, like capitalism will take care of it for you. Right? And now the code pays for itself to be maintained, right? And what more could you ask? And so that's why that was but okay, back to the early days before all that, or kind of, there was this wonderful period where we raised money, but we didn't know what it meant to be a company yet. We were still just a bunch of hippies. And so the fun part about that was that, like, right here at this desk was Michael Rogers, who has gone on to do a whole bunch of Node.js stuff since then, working for us at the time. And then Isaac Schluter working for himself for fun, writing npm, and me being like, y'all should make those packages immutable. And I've been like, no, and right, like, there was also, we had like the early Node.js meetups in the downtown Oakland office. There's another world that didn't happen where Ryan Dahl joined Couch instead of Joyent, and we had an Erlang supervisor tree for the Node.js ecosystem. So yeah, that's always fun for me to think about what could have been. Anyway, that's my story.
That's awesome. What I'll do here is turn off the recording, and as usual, whoever wants to drop off can. Thank you all for attending. This is the informal lo-fi vibe time.